Marcus slumped in the back corner of Professor Hawthorne's advanced combat theory class, his worn notebook filled with doodles rather than notes. Around him, his classmates demonstrated perfect magical forms, streams of brilliant fire, walls of crystalline ice, and bolts of crackling lightning that lit up the training hall like fireworks. Meanwhile, Marcus could barely summon a spark that would flutter and die before anyone noticed. "Pathetic," whispered Darian, the class prodigy, loud enough for Marcus to hear. How did someone like him even get accepted into Arcanum Academy? The question had haunted Marcus for 3 years. While his peers advanced through increasingly complex spellwork, he remained stuck on the most basic incantations. His fire spells produced smoke. His shield charms cracked under the lightest pressure. Even his levitation attempts resulted in objects hovering unsteadily for mere seconds before crashing to the ground. Professor Hawthorne's stern voice cut through the ambient magical energy. "Tomorrow's practical examination will determine your final rankings. Those in the bottom 10% will face academic review." Her eyes swept across the room, lingering on Marcus with what seemed like disappointment. "I trust you'll all demonstrate the skills befitting future mages of the realm." That evening, Marcus sat alone in the dormitory common room, staring at his textbooks while other students practiced in groups. The pages might as well have been written in ancient Draconic for all the sense they made to him. Every theory, every formula, every carefully described technique felt like trying to grasp smoke with bare hands. "Still pretending you belong here?" Darian appeared with his usual entourage, their magical auras practically glowing with confidence. "Face it, Blackwood. Some people are born for greatness, and others." He gestured dismissively at Marcus. "Others are born to serve those who are." Marcus closed his book and stood. "Maybe you're right." His voice was quiet, resigned. "Maybe I don't belong here." The next morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. The practical examination would take place in the grand arena, where tiered seating allowed the entire academy to witness each student's demonstration. Marcus watched from the waiting area as his classmates showcased their abilities. Darian summoned a magnificent dragon made of pure flame that soared around the arena to thunderous applause. Elena crafted an intricate garden of ice sculptures that sparkled like diamonds. Trevor called forth a storm cloud that rumbled with barely contained power. "Marcus Blackwood," Professor Hawthorne announced. The arena fell silent as Marcus walked to the center. 200 faces stared down at him, most wearing expressions ranging from pity to barely concealed amusement. He could hear whispered conversations about the Academy's mistake and how embarrassing this would. Marcus raised his hands, attempting the standard demonstration spell, a sphere of elemental energy that every first-year student mastered within weeks. Nothing happened. He tried again, focusing harder than he ever had before. A tiny spark appeared, flickered, and died. Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. Someone shouted, "Just give up already." But something shifted inside Marcus at that moment. 3 years of humiliation, of being overlooked, of being told he wasn't good enough, it all crystallized into a single, burning thought: what if I'd been approaching this all wrong? Instead of forcing his magic outward like everyone else, Marcus turned it inward. He stopped trying to create light and instead embraced the darkness he'd always carried. He stopped fighting against his perceived weakness and started listening to the strange whispers he'd been hearing since childhood, whispers he'd always dismissed as imagination. The temperature in the arena dropped 10 degrees. Marcus opened his eyes, and they were no longer brown but deep violet, swirling with an otherworldly energy that made several spectators gasp. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that seemed to come from multiple sources at once. "I am not weak," he said, and the words resonated through the stone walls. "I am something else entirely." Shadows began pooling around his feet, not the absence of light but something deeper, living darkness that moved with purpose and intelligence. The whispers grew louder, and Marcus finally understood what they were saying. They were the voices of every shadow that had ever existed, every dark corner where secrets were kept, every place where light had never reached. He was a voidwalker, a being capable of manipulating the space between spaces, the darkness that existed before light was ever conceived. It was a power so rare that most mages believed it to be myth, and so dangerous that those who possessed it were historically either revered as gods or hunted as demons. Marcus lifted his hand, and the shadows responded. They rose like liquid mercury, forming shapes that defied physics, geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly, creatures that seemed to exist in more dimensions than the eye could process. The very air began to ripple as he bent space around himself, stepping partially out of reality. The arena was dead silent now, the kind of silence that comes with witnessing something that fundamentally changes your understanding of what's possible. For 3 years, you've all looked at me and seen failure, Marcus continued, his voice echoing from directions that shouldn't exist. You saw someone who couldn't light a candle or lift a feather. But light has never been my element. I am the darkness between stars, the void that gives meaning to existence itself. With a gesture, he dissolved the shadows and stepped back into normal space, his eyes returning to their usual brown color. The supernatural cold lifted, leaving only the stunned faces of 200 people who had just witnessed the emergence of perhaps the most powerful mage the Academy had ever seen. Professor Hawthorne was the first to find her voice. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her tone completely transformed. "Perhaps we should discuss alternative coursework." Marcus nodded once and walked toward the exit, his footsteps echoing in the silence. As he reached the doorway, he paused and looked back at Darian, whose face had gone pale. "You were right about one thing," Marcus said. "Some people are born for greatness. You just had the wrong person in mind." From that day forward, Marcus Blackwood was no longer the worst student at Arcanum Academy. He was something far more dangerous and far more valuable. He was himself, finally and completely, wielding powers that belonged to the spaces between worlds. The whispers still came to him in quiet moments, but now he welcomed them. They were the voices of his true heritage, and he was ready to listen.